Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar titled Artificial Intelligence for Nonprofits. My name is Ross Chan. I'm from Belmar Consulting Group, and Belmar is a Salesforce.org impact partner, and we specialize in implementations of Salesforce for nonprofit use cases. Like most of you gathered here today, I chose a career working for and serving nonprofits, wanting to make an impact on people's lives. We can better achieve our organizational mission by deepening relationships with our constituents and supporters, gaining internal efficiencies, and improving upon the programs and services that we offer. To help us get there, I'm super excited about our discussion today and to learn from an expert in artificial intelligence and its application in a nonprofit use case. Before I introduce our guest, there are a few housekeeping items that I want to share. The first is, we definitely want to hear from you throughout the Zoom. So please post your questions in the Zoom chat, and you will find that capability in the Zoom control panel. We will do our best to answer as many questions during our Q&A session, which will be held after our discussion today. Number two, for the best viewing experience, I recommend viewing the webinar in speaker view. That way you'll see the screen change from my face to our guests as we have our discussion. And you can access the speaker view as well in the top right corner of your Zoom window. We actually have a raffle at the end of this webinar. Winners do need to be present to win. So hang on till the end and keep an ear open as we might call your name. We are going to be muting all the lines, and we ask that you remain on mute throughout the webinar for the benefit of everyone who is participating. And finally, this webinar will be recorded. And it will be available on Belmar TV, which is our YouTube channel, just following the event. That's all the housekeeping. And so with that, I'm super excited to welcome our guest today. Joining us all the way from Toronto, it's Mr. Wes Moon, who is the co-founder and COO of a company called Wisely. Welcome, Wes. How are you feeling today? And are you jazzed to share your thoughts about artificial intelligence?
You know, Ross, every morning I wake up and I say, who can I talk to about AI and nonprofits? So yeah, of course I'm jazzed.
Well, I'm the lucky guy today, as well as all the folks who are joining us on today's webinar. So we're super excited to chat with you. I thought we'd first have you tell us a little bit about yourself, Wes. Your career arc, and what drew you initially to working with nonprofits?
You know, I got into nonprofit, actually, like many people, by accident. I had a job, and oddly enough, my friend's mom said, "Hey, Wes, you know something about computers?" And she understood that I was cheap, a very affordable employee. And she said, "Why don't you come work for the University of Toronto?" Which I did, and I haven't really looked back. I think when I first got into nonprofit, I really did, quite honestly, think of fundraising as a little bit like, it was a little bit off-putting, where I was like, well, people are just giving money to this, to the university. The university has lots of money. They also have lots of needs, and education is incredibly important. But I'd quickly made the connection to a lot of the volunteering efforts and grassroots fundraising that I had and my family had done while growing up. And I honestly haven't looked back. I've been serving the nonprofit sector for the last 20 years.
Excellent. And then most recently, so in what capacities have you been serving nonprofits?
Well, I spent 10 years raising money at U of T. I went to a company called Cornerstone and managed their fundraising vertical, processing transactions and managing data and modeling. I then went back to nonprofit. I worked for a hospital in the Toronto area, Sunnybrook, for their foundation. I then went back into tech and worked for a company called Blackbaud, and it's there where it really had the idea to start Wisely and provide better tech to nonprofits. They deserve it. They need it.
That's okay. So that brings us to current date or current state and to your co-founding of Wisely. So tell us a little bit about Wisely. What was the problem that you were wanting to solve, and what inspired you to start this service?
The inspiration really came, half of it came from sort of my past work in nonprofit and figuring out the right kind of process to tackle larger donations, smaller donations, but in a methodical, repeatable way. And when I was working in tech, part of my responsibility was managing a sales team. And I was blown away by the number of tools that are available to sales professionals to be good at their job. And anyone listening in, and that's a fundraiser, understands that there is a parallel between sales and fundraising. And when I was looking at that landscape of tools that are designed for sales professionals to help them identify and close deals, I really thought the sector would be well served if we could, provide some tech that would help on the identification and the process and closing, the largest deals that a charity can do, and then seeing how we can build that pipeline to grow the smaller donors into larger donors in a much more efficient way. So that really was like the genesis of like, how do we apply some of that sales tech that's out there, so we're not totally reinventing the wheel, and using my past experience in people and process to build up these teams and fundraising, like that fundraising success, that fundraising machine, in one package. So this is my goal, and I want to get it to every nonprofit that's out there.
That's interesting. So most nonprofits have a fundraising arm, unless you're a foundation and you're actually giving away money. But as you looked at trying to solve that problem, where does artificial intelligence come in? And maybe we should actually take a step back. How do you actually define artificial intelligence? Because I think that term conjures up a lot of images in our audience today. Anything from robots and movies with Will Smith to, any other sort of science fiction that's out there. So tell us about AI. What is it to you, and how is that being applied in this problem that you were aiming to solve?
So there's sort of a clear definition, I think, that we need to throw out there, which is this concept of generalized AI. And generalized AI is, I guess like the people best at it might be the Boston Dynamics folks that are building dancing robots and dogs and things that are figuring out more complex problems like opening a door to get to something. But the way we think about AI for the nonprofit and how anyone here should be thinking about it is it's going to help you answer a very specific question at scale. So what does that mean? What we want to be able to do is say, if a human can look at some data, can look at a problem and kind of think about it for a minute and use their intuition to guess what will happen. Okay. In the case of Wisely, we could look at a donor's record and look at their past giving and look at the interactions and opportunities that exist and kind of make a guess at what that donor is going to do next and when that donor will do it. So we call that human intuition. And the way we think about AI is, how do we automate that human intuition, a good human at scale? Coincidentally, this is the same way the breakthroughs in self-driving car technology has come around, and that they were trying to solve a very complex problem using radar and LiDAR. And it turns out that the best way is to copy what a smart human does just by evaluating the pictures the car takes as it drives and applying that model. So that's where the training data comes into it. So let me recap where we are so far. We're going to set aside generalized AI, which is, the Isaac Asimov robot that thinks and is like a human or a something synthroid. So we're going to set that aside. It's not practical for, at least 10 years, let's say. Then we're going to say, okay, we want to be able to automate human intuition at scale. So if we think of Nest, a Nest is a product that lots of people have. And a Nest uses AI to figure out what does Ross like the temperature of his house to be. And the Nest is also designed to say, okay, let's always just try to save Ross a little bit of money. So it's answering two questions. How warm or cool can we keep Ross's house and save some dollars? And where is Ross comfortable? So those are two very specific things that AI can solve because they're specific problems. And the next thing that we'd probably want to talk about are like, what are the generally accepted AI tools that you could use to solve those things? I mentioned one with the cars, that's image processing. So image processing is actually one of the most common applications of AI today. It's used in lots of different things. U of T, actually, the University of Toronto, really launched AI through image processing through this competition they used to have. Is it a dog or is it a muffin? And that's where finally AI started to be able to beat a human in a 1-minute exercise to be able to identify them with accuracy. So image processing, natural language processing, we've done this before. We've talked to our phones and the devices on our wall or our TVs. That's the interpretation of what we're saying. Depending on the data that you're using to train on, that can be specific to an accent or whatever. So there's lots of different ways you can use natural language processing. The last being structured data. Structured data is a perfect application for nonprofit. Nonprofits generally have pretty clean CRMs. These CRMs are mandated by the government. You need to know at least where someone lives. You need to know their name so you can issue the right kind of documentation if a gift was made. And you have their address, at which point you have lots of information about someone. And that's the information that we use to make our predictions.
That's good. That's good information because, I think some of us here today look at AI again in that science fiction type of lens, and maybe even fear it for, job replacement. I mean, so I need to ask you, just for the benefit of everybody here, do you intend on creating a Wisely robot that would actually take the place of a director of development and their minions, right? Trying to do good for their organizations. Is that part of your roadmap?
World dominance is just around the corner. But in all honesty, what we really want to be able to do is automate the intuition of human beings. And if we do that, and if we're able to do it at scale, then we can take some of that low value repeatable work that people do and turn that time that they would spend on that into something good. So maybe, Ross, I'll tell you a little story. I remember, I know you're in Southern California, which is a wonderful place, and I had taken a road trip there years ago. So in order to do that, I started at CAA, and CAA made that tick trip, and they highlight maps. You're probably too young to know what that one is. Yeah, or AAA in the United States. So
got it. Yeah, AAA. Definitely.
AAA, CAA in Canada, we are actually different countries. So, much to America's chagrin, I think. So as we then sort of move forward in the timeline, I'm going to visit someone in Chicago, and I use MapQuest. And MapQuest is mind-blowing. All of a sudden, it's going to plan the route for me. So there's less work that I have to do, but I still have that map on my dashboard, and like, okay, I'm through this step. What's the next step? Where am I turning next? Now, when I wake up in the morning and I have to go somewhere, my phone will tell me, hey, Wes, it's time to get up. We've got a trip planned for today. And that trip is going to take an hour based on all the traffic that you have to face. So off my plate is setting an alarm with context to my calendar. Off my plate is printing out the stuff that I need to do. Off my plate is managing the map, where I don't even think about where I'm going. I get in my car and it tells me where to go. So what that does is it just elevates what I can think on and work on in a day. And that's how AI should be really thought about in the nonprofit sector. It's not replacing jobs, it's elevating the work that we can do. And if fundraising, I like to call it a full contact sport, you like, people have to talk to each other to make real stuff happen. And if we can help more of those conversations take place, coincidentally, we can make more of those conversations take place with better outcomes. But if we can even make more of those conversations take place by reducing the amount of toil or administration, we've already won. And that's how AI can help nonprofits.
Got it. You've mentioned that part of the benefit for AI in this nonprofit fundraising context is sort of processing data at scale. So when you mentioned at scale a couple of times, what does that mean exactly? If I'm a nonprofit and I'm processing 100 donations a year, is AI still relevant for me versus I'm a nonprofit and I'm processing 1,000 donations a year? Tell me what scale means, and is there a threshold, right, where AI has the biggest return?
So I guess it would depend on the exact problem that the AI is solving for this charity. But if you're processing 100 gifts a year, my deep desire would be that you already know who those 100 people are, and you're just in somewhat regular communication with them.
Right.
So, AI might be a little bit overkill in that particular case. When you get to 1,000, and we have clients who have 1,000 donations a year that actually receive real benefit, that's when things start to happen, and you don't happen to know who all those players are that are coming in. And perhaps you then have to make some choice. So if I'm a fundraiser and I'm raising money for my food bank and I have 1,000 donors, I have to decide who the most 100 are I'm going to personally spend time with. And the other 900 are going to just get our emails and maybe our mail if people are still mailing. And I know some people are still mailing a lot. So that's where it starts to come into play. Now, if the AI is being used on the services side in identifying, people who are at risk, I've mentioned natural language processing. One of our clients is actually using natural language processing to evaluate the mental health of people calling into their hotline. Right. So that's completely unrelated to what I consider to be, charity and revenue. But it is still an interesting application that even at low volume would be quite useful.
Right. I worked with a client, Wes, that was developing technology. They were a crisis hotline, and all of their phone workers and counselors were volunteers. So they got a lot of calls, and what they wanted was natural language processing to help call certain keywords and indicators that would suggest that this person was at higher risk, right, of harming themselves or somebody else. And if that happened, the intelligence was supposed to sort of flag that conversation and then elevate from me, the volunteer, to a sort of a trained social worker, right, who would be better equipped to chat with that person and give them the support that they need. So I get that. I get that certainly from a scale perspective. Even for the nonprofits that are working with hundreds of donors, hundreds of donors is still, you need to prioritize who you're going to call that day, right? Who has the biggest propensity, given your data set, to deepen their relationship with you. So thanks for explaining that. I think that the scale question, I think, is important. When you in your experience, when you have conversations about artificial intelligence in a nonprofit use case with NGOs, how does the subject even come up? What are they asking? What are they looking for? And what does that conversation look like? How does it get started?
If we sort of see two different types of people coming into us. And type 1 sort of fits the bill of what you're describing. And in type 1, we'll have someone who either knows something about AI and is exploring options to find ways to use AI in their organization, number one. Or number two, you've got someone who's on the board who said, you need to be looking at AI. It's being used in banking and insurance extensively. Legal uses it. Like it's being used in virtually every vertical in some successful fashion. So they're sort of like the directive to go find it. In both cases, we tend to have an education period to say, some of the questions that you asked, Ross, are similar questions that I've heard before directly from NGOs, in particular, a prospect researcher or a fundraiser saying, is this going to eliminate my job? And you understand my response. I think absolutely not. It elevates your job. But the sort of the what I'd consider to be one of the more nerdy folks who really are deeply interested in AI, like I am, nerd. I'm a nerd for sure. So, those conversations tend to be a little bit different. They want to know about our algorithms and our training data sets, and have, I could say, like a general understanding of how the whole thing works. So I do see both of those types of people coming into us. The third group that we see, they don't care if we have AI or not. They're just trying to raise more money.
Right.
And those end up being really good engagements for us as well.
Sure. I think when you're stepping into a development or fundraising role, I think the challenge is how to accelerate or enhance or grow that donor database. So, right. So I think that's a common mission that the folks on this call share. And again, I think what we're talking about is an application of artificial intelligence to enhance that process, right? What have you seen so far with the folks and clients that have actually engaged with Wisely, right? What's been the feedback? What sort of results are people seeing in using this kind of technology?
Yeah, the first thing that I'd say is that sometimes people hope it'll be magic and then the money will just come in.
Yeah.
But you still have to talk to people to make that happen. Sadly, we haven't solved that problem yet. But I'll give you a really good example. I've got the numbers off the top of my head. So we had a new fundraiser join an organization, and we got a hold of this gentleman, Troy, from Kelowna's Gospel Mission up in Kelowna, BC. So closer to your headquarters anyway. And Troy was a brand new fundraiser, brand new to the organization. He had all the right skills to be successful. And all we really did for Troy, it was train him up a little bit on Wisely. Part of what Wisely will do for you is it's going to recommend your next action for prospects. And we started with, hey, let's look at some prospects whose next gift just looks like it's going to be $1,000 or more. And we started adding them into his portfolio. The recommendation in this particular case, because they hadn't been communicated regularly with, was, hey, stewardship, call and thank the donor, find out what they care about. And in his first 60 days, he raised $70,000.
Wow.
It hasn't even, we're at 8 months. The 3-year value of his portfolio is $1.5 million.
Wow.
So we're really excited about what Troy was able to do. And, you know, the numbers are really clear because he didn't have a portfolio before.
Right. So that leads me to my next question. He didn't have a portfolio. Does that mean he didn't have an existing donor database to begin with? Where did he get the data to analyze?
Yeah, so they had a corporate giving officer. They have a robust direct marketing program. So they had thousands of donors, tens of thousands of donors a year, somewhere in that range. And of course, they've been in existence for quite some time. So they had a pretty rich database. But very rarely do we ever encounter a database. I think we've had one where we encountered a database where sort of like the history and the people that were, we'll call them the uncovered gems, there weren't many. In almost every case, like we're in the 99th percentile here, we're going to uncover some real gems for you. You're going to engage with them, and in a very short period of time, you're going to get some cash.
Okay. So again, if I'm tasked, Wes, I'm stepping into a director of development role, and let's say I have a pretty mature donor database. But again, I'm tasked with expanding on that footprint. Mm-hmm. How does this technology work with, I guess, other data sets, right? Folks that don't currently live within your existing donor database. Can you buy lists? Does it, you know, tell me the data inputs and how that work?
So we're very, like, the way we are operating today, we're very much a fish in your own pond.
Right.
So we're to say it in the most business way possible, we're going to help you maximize your revenue from the people you know. Okay. It is very much another problem to solve, to say who in the public is going to be the right people to target and to give. We do some work with a partner in social media that is actually very good at understanding. It actually uses AI to understand your audience and help write your messages so you can connect better with your donor audiences. So there are other tools out there that can solve your prospecting problem. But Wisely is very much a fish in your own pond tool.
Got it. That makes sense. Forgive all that dinging on my side. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay, so it's you fish in your own pond kind of. That's a good answer, because again, I was thinking of a different use case. Where, you know, tell me more about AI in a nonprofit landscape, and I guess maybe the future of Wisely. I think we've been focused on fundraising and development. What are the other applications that you see for AI in a nonprofit use case?
So when you're looking at AI tools for nonprofits, it can be anywhere from hiring, vacation management and scheduling of volunteers. The applications would be pretty much endless to all the different tasks that would exist in nonprofit, which is an absolutely massive industry. If we go back into fundraising itself, using personality assessments on major gift donors with the emails that go back and forth between a development officer and a major gift prospect, even assigning the right gift officer to that prospect. And you can actually determine someone's Ocean score. It's a personality trait measure used by psychiatrists to evaluate. It's called the Big Five. You can determine that in a reasonably efficient manner and then start to make decisions. So even getting down to the fundraiser management, there's applicability to AI. Now, the challenge that I see in the nonprofit sector is sort of a risk and reward. So nonprofits, when they're spending money, are doing so, generally they're using money that was received from donors. And in a way, they're investing money that could be used for good works for future good works and bigger future good works. So that, like, it is an investment, but there's also an element of risk, and the sector as a whole is risk adverse because of they have to make that choice about, well, do we spend it on curing cancer, which is an incredibly important problem, or do we spend it on getting better at what we do so we can have more money in the future? And the general recommendation that I have is that you should not be building it yourself. It's very complicated. It's easy to get wrong. If you just have one person working on it, you'll have, we haven't talked about bias, but you'll have bias from that program. You'll probably end up with bias from your data, and it's going to perhaps lead you down a road that you don't want to go. So from a general standpoint, when you're looking at any problem, be it hiring, fundraising, letter writing, triage, whatever you're using this for, it should be clear what the gain will be, and it should be clear that it would be cheaper to find something off the shelf, so you're not on that bleeding edge.
Right. Yeah, and I think that makes sense, as you say, just the ability to process a lot of these data points at scale, and the next best action, right? To have an intelligent assistant, if you will, sort of make those suggestions so you can prioritize your day, whether it's from program management, service delivery, or fundraising. I think that's clear. But you brought up an interesting point here that I want to unpack a little bit, and that is, I have heard about bias sort of built into AI. What does that mean to sort of the lay crowd here, including myself? How does bias show up in artificial intelligence, and how do we as nonprofits deal with bias? And what does that mean for organizations?
So let's we're gonna take an example here, and we're a fictional school, and in our fictional school we have an engineering the department. So historically, this school has targeted the engineering department for big gifts, and they've done a lot of engagement with them. And if you think about how AI makes its predictions, how it works, you build an algorithm, you put in the training data. So the training data is then what it's going to use for pattern recognition. And then it's going to start making predictions or suggestions, however we want to look at it. So in the case of this school, we're taking all of that data where that organization was focused on engineering, and maybe engineering in a particular neighborhood, and we put it into the machine, and the machine's going to spit out, guess what? Engineers are your best donors, and you need to keep working with them. When in fact, that may actually not be true. It's only true because it's what the organization has done over time. That's
Right.
one example of bias. There are more examples that would be, like putting gender in and having 50 years of data where organizations were more focused on men versus women, for instance. Like that's a simple example, but the process an organization follows starts to dictate what some of that bias will look like moving forward. And there are ways to beat it. I mean, here's a really good example for bias. Back in 1998, I built my first model, a regression model, and I took all this robust data that we had at the university, and I threw it in. I got the code working. It took a week to train it, and it turns out that the biggest predictor of someone being a major gift prospect was if they have a middle name. And I started thinking about this. I was just a kid at the time, and I was like, I wonder if it has something to do with like people with middle names are maybe more pretentious, and maybe that's like a leading indicator of that they have money. And no, it turns out that if you look like a major gift prospect to the research team, they're entering your middle name into the database. So it was just alluding to the fact that there was a process in place that identified major gift prospects. And when that happened, you enter the full name, first, middle, last. And, obviously that is a very crude example of what bias can look like in AI.
Right.
But modern AI, you often don't get to see the variables as to why this recommendation or like this prediction, this pattern extension is there, like why it's there. So it's harder to identify that bias today by the way the algorithms are built.
Right. What you just mentioned, it sounds like an organization itself could have bias in their own process, standing alone from AI tools. Is that what I heard you saying?
Yeah, you heard I say that loud and clear.
Yeah.
We all have bias in some way, and even if we wish that we didn't, unconscious bias is a part of our lives. Bias that's supported by data seems like it should be more easily identified. Sometimes it's actually harder.
Right. No, it's interesting because I'm sort of looking at my own life, and I'm wondering, in my thinking and in my decision making. I mean, clearly I have filters, but I guess is our filters another word for bias?
It could be.
Right. It's
I
like
think that's the broad answer there.
My life experience, right, leads me to be more progressive or more conservative, right? But isn't that what we're talking about? Kind of bias?
Totally. Human evolution makes us biased.
Yeah.
When we were sort of evolving on the plains of Serengeti, our job was not to be eaten by lions.
Right.
And we kind of learn what's dangerous and stay away from it. So we may actually try something. It didn't work, but it only didn't work because of an unusual circumstance. And perhaps that's actually the best thing that we could do, but we may never go back to it.
Right.
So that bias certainly exists in I think all our work in some way.
Yeah. So I know this question of bias is maybe a little high level for this discussion. So the last thing I want to ask about it is if we have an awareness of it as an organization, either in our own processes and then certainly in the application of an artificial intelligence tool, right? So there's bias in our own process in our organization. There's bias in the way the algorithms were derived, right, or created in this tool. How does an organization wrap their arms around? Do we need to combat against bias? Do we need to run sort of contrarian data sets so we get a broader perspective and sort of purposely seek out the opposite, or sort of a broader data set?
Yeah, there are two ways to tackle this problem. In fact, Wisely helps its clients tackle this problem two different ways. First, we're able to, the way we've structured our data is that we're able to train a universal model. And the universal model is generally going to push nonprofits toward best practice. Now, that universal model also puts a lot more emphasis on the data specifically that belongs to the client, of course. That only makes sense. But the other thing that we do is we actually push confusion into our application. So we're going to take some good use cases and confirm they are in fact non-good use cases as we sort of push our predictions out. So, every once in a while, we're going to say, well, this donor doesn't look like they're good, but we want to confirm that type of donor isn't.
I see. And then then with that sort of built-in confusion, right? Sort of checking and double checking the data sets. How does that end up in terms of accuracy, right? In terms of, the actual predictability of the model? Is it better than 50%? Is it 60%? Can you put a number on that, Wes?
Yeah, I think for every client, we sort of use back testing as a method to say exactly like how accurate were we. We can predict where more than 90% of your revenue is going to come from this year on January 1st by which donors.
Wow.
So we feel pretty good about it. There's room for improvement, in particular on the extreme outliers. So even if you have a very large database of $1 million donors, the $1 million are still a rarity compared to the rest of your data. So it might only be 0.5% of your database.
Wow.
So there aren't like the predicting $1 million is a lot harder than predicting more than 100,000, let's say. So that's a piece of machine learning that we continue to have to work on and improve. The more data we get, the better we are at it. So, quite frankly, more clients, better predictions is a simple answer there. On sort of a philosophical standpoint, in order for us to help our clients make money, all we have to do is be better than their average fundraiser. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which I think, generally we're doing pretty good there.
Yeah. I think being able to predict with 90% accuracy, where 90% of their funds are coming from, I think that's pretty tremendous. I think that insight would be quantifiable, right? For many organizations to get their arms around.
It's really nice for a fundraiser to look at their portfolio and know they have a shot at making it on January 1st or whenever their period starts.
Right. There's a clear roadmap here, and the data is telling me that I can get there. That's amazing. One more question for you, Mr. Moon, and that is, from where you've been working for nonprofits in a fundraising capacity to working in technology for nonprofits to now starting this company and helping nonprofits, right, really identify, where their best supporters are coming from. What's the one thing that you want everyone to leave from this discussion today?
Yeah, if nonprofits are too risk adverse to invest in technology, they're going to get left behind. AI is only one of the things that the nonprofit sector needs to improve on. And the expectation of its donors, its clients, has dramatically shifted over the last 18 months. But even 18 months ago, I think it was only accepted because they were nonprofit. And I think the world has changed enough that if you aren't going to be on that digital revolution cycle, you're going to get left behind.
Right. Okay. So explore it and get on board with technology.
Yeah, it's, I look back at, I've had the opportunity to work through two very big sort of downturns in the market. And the nonprofits who invested during that time and ended up in a very different place than when they went in. And part of that has to do with that, like the risk aversion. One of my clients way back in the day, they stopped paper acquisition. And I wondered, geez, is this a good idea? But it transformed the organization from one thing to something else, and something that's far more sustainable. So, they sort of, it gave up one way of doing things to adopt another, which was important to its future. And I really see that, holding true right now. Hospital foundations just in Canada, and it's not the same in the United States, but in Canada, most of them just had their best year ever. What are they doing to make sure that next year is their best year ever?
Right.
I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the same thing they did last year, and it's certainly not going to be the same thing they did 2 or 3 years ago.
Right. And I lied. I said that was going to be my last question, but that brings up, this is the very last question. And that is, last year, I think, was a curveball for everybody on this call. And nobody could have predicted that something unseen, like a virus, could thoroughly disrupt pretty much everything that we do, from business to schooling to, how we raise our kids, right? How did that experience, how should people and organizations and the folks on the call today, how should we be looking at this kind of technology in that lens, right? What sort of pearls of wisdom do you have to share with a world that's unpredictable?
Well, first, I think adaptability is going to be one of those most desirable strengths in your people and organizations moving forward. And I actually believe that we're going to see very rapid changes in consumer and, by extension, donor behavior and how they relate to brands. All of that, that's not going back to the way it used to, but I don't think that journey is yet complete. So that adaptability becomes so critically important to our future success. When we look at, how would I say this? That changing environment, technology is a solution. And what makes that solution good is that it's typically scalable. You're not the first person that gets to do this, so it's sort of a proven path to follow. That's not to say that everything that you do needs to be fully digital, but I think we should be rethinking our entire process as organizations. When I think about what we had to do during the pandemic, we lost both our offices. We went fully remote. The education sector is small college education sector in the United States, which was our core focus just prior to the pandemic, was hurt in financially in unmeasurable ways. Like, they lost their donors, they lost their students, they lost their staff. And, for like all of those decisions that we had to make, all the charities had to make them too, about how do we build our business and get it going and keep going strong. And like the treadmill that we all live on, like, how do we keep that at 7? And that it's flat out just going to continue, in my personal opinion.
I agree. Right. Again, I think if last year taught us anything, and that is the ability to adapt and to, be able to pivot quickly, is a foundational skill that all organizations are going to have to adopt. So, Wes, I really want to thank you for sharing your insight today. We're going to move to the Q&A section of this webinar. And I do have a couple questions here that have come through. One is, you had mentioned social media and its relation to AI. What do you see in that space? How are AI nonprofits and social media related?
So when we do social media, there's a lot of work that we have to manage, let's say. So we've got ads, we've got what does our message look like, what images are we going to use. Now, right now, today, on any one platform, and I'm sure every single platform out there is using AI to figure out who best to target and display your ads to, which is important for your donor acquisition. But even understanding the language that is used to engage with an audience. What are the words that matter most? What's the sentiment? Sentiment is one of those things that can be predicted from words pretty easily. So is it adversarial? Is it friendly? How do we start creating our work so that it will engage most with our audience? Oh, and by the way, we can use AI to look at our audience at scale. What do they care about? Who are the three different personalities that we're dealing with here?
Right.
So that's one way I really see AI becoming powerful in social media.
Right. It reminds me of that ability that social media organizations have to create a lookalike target audience, right? So if by using a technology like Wisely, you have a profile, a desired profile of donor or supporter, you could create this lookalike audience and kind of reach out that way, right? I mean, am I sort of understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's one application. I think the other is, what message should you be sending?
Right.
When's the best time for us to send it by channel? That if you're looking at Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, for instance, all of those have their own individual stats, but they don't go anywhere else.
Right.
If you have a thing that says, first we post to Instagram, and we do that on Tuesday mornings, and next we post to this, like that's a useful application to maximize your reach there.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, I get that. Boy, you can really go down a rabbit hole with that level of granularity. Another question here: with more talk about user privacy and data collection, how do you navigate the space between users' privacy and gathering meaningful data?
Yeah, that's a great question. We at the very beginning, we kind of had access to some pretty interesting data sets, and sort of one of our very first mantras as we were designing the company is that we will not be Cambridge Analytica. So from the very beginning, we were designing with some of the world's most stringent privacy laws in sort of the back of our mind. So actually, in our model, we send almost no personally identifiable information, and that is by design. And anything that would be considered PIP comes directly from our clients. So we're actually undergoing a test right now with some external data pens, and we're testing to see how much that would help us identify some of those outliers. So is it 100,000? Is it 1 million? Is it 12 million? Those kind of outliers. So I don't know that we're going to end up going down that road of saying, hey, Ross has a yacht, and how much does owning a yacht dictate how quickly and how large your gift will be? Because I don't know if we need it. but it is certainly a very sticky space. And the way I look at it is that if I would feel uncomfortable for someone to do that to me, we're not going to do it. Now, I will say the idea certainly crosses our minds all the time about some pretty interesting data sets. Google, for instance, they bought Fitbit. They can see what ads that they send you and how that affects your heart rate. Should they do that? Oh. No, right? And maybe this is like why the deal's held up in regulation. I don't know. But like these are the things that we think about when it comes to data privacy.
Got it. By the way, my yacht is named the USS Minnow.
Don't take a 3-hour cruise.
For you Gilligan's Islands fans. I think we have time for one more quick question, Wes. And I'm going to pick this one. So many nonprofits rely on wealth screening. Wealth screening tools like WealthX, iWave, Wealth Engine. Does AI replace these tools and provide more accurate insight, or are those tools that can be leveraged by AI?
Yeah, so one of them's a yacht, the other's a pleasure boat, and if you're rich enough, you should have both. Terrible analogy, actually. One of them is a data append, the other's a prediction. So a lot of our clients do wealth screens like I know they have WealthX and iWave and others. And we're exploring partnerships to be able to integrate their data into our solution. What we do find, quite honestly, is that some of the best donors that we identify are the same as the best donors that an iWave would identify. Where the big difference starts to come into play. They're saying capacity. Sometimes they have a propensity model. We have a target amount and a target date, which is actionable. The other piece, though, is your mid-level givers. So those people who give, between, we'll call it $500 and $10,000 or $25,000, somewhere in that range. 3/4 of them don't screen wealthy. So we have a good number of these, what I consider to be mid-level relationship, maybe slightly more transactional than major gift donors who are making substantial size gifts that your wealth screen won't identify at all.
That is a very valuable kernel of wisdom that you just shared with us, Wes. Thank you. Thank you for that. You have been tremendous, my new friend. We're almost at the end of this webinar, and I have to quickly go to our raffle winners. So if a Kirk Schmidt and Jordana Fry are still with us, congratulations, you both have won the Belmar raffle. So you'll be getting something in the mail from us. But in conclusion, I just want to thank everyone so much for attending our webinar today. Wes, again, thank you. Your insight and really your experience, not only in nonprofits, but certainly in the technology space as it relates to artificial intelligence, has been very, very insightful. Thank you. We can't thank you enough. For everyone, this recording will be available on the Belmar YouTube channel. So it's Belmar TV. You can find us there. We have another webinar. It's scheduled all the way on October the 19th on the subject of case management for nonprofits. So follow us on our social media channels for more information on that webinar and other Belmar events. With that, everyone, thank you again. Be safe, and we'll see you next time.